Hello info person, this is Anton, and today we're going to be discussing yet another exciting discovery when it comes to very bizarre galaxies that don't really make sense, and that was strictly hypothetical for many years. And in this case, you're seeing this galaxy right here. This is known as Candidate Dark Galaxy 2, CDG2 for short. Something that obviously doesn't look like a galaxy at all, because it's almost entirely invisible, and something that also kind of challenges our understanding of how galaxies are formed and what they should have inside. And so in this video we're going to focus on this new discovery and new confirmation coming from the study you can find in the description, and basically focus on this now confirmed dark galaxy that some scientists predicted should exist all over the place. But before we start, let's briefly discuss dark galaxies as a concept, just so that it all makes sense. And so first, this is not what we discussed in some of the previous videos that would resemble something like this. This is not a diffuse galaxy, such as a diffuse dwarf galaxy, that the researchers have found in a lot of different places, and usually resembles something like this. Now, these are also mysterious for a slightly different reason, but that's not what we're discussing today. Instead, we're discussing the concept of dark galaxies. And while in standard astronomy, we usually identify galaxies by the light from their stars. But for a very long time, some astronomers theorized the existence of dark galaxies, or basically objects predominantly made out of mysterious dark matter that barely contain any stars, or might not even have any stars at all. And in this case, they're basically made out of this dark matter, involving some kind of a hypothetical form of invisible material that seems to produce no light and only interacts with stuff through gravity. We obviously still have no idea what it is, but the effects of dark matter seem to be visible everywhere. And because its gravitational influence is visible in a lot of different objects, some scientists assume that maybe there is actually a galaxy made entirely out of it. And while in the last 10 years or so, researchers found a lot of these diffuse galaxies that were predominantly dark matter, but still contain quite a few stars. This is actually one of the best examples, Dragonfly 44. It seems to be approximately 99.9% dark matter, but is still sort of visible, as you can see in this image. In contrast, CDG2 is special because it doesn't even seem to contain stars or normal matter, and was actually discovered for a completely different reason. And well, I guess let's discuss how exactly this was found, and why researchers are pretty certain now that this is the first confirmed case of a dark galaxy. And so first of all, this was actually a multi-step process. It involved different telescopes and different observations, with the observations from the Hubble Space Telescope in 2025 basically being some of the most detailed ones. And so here, using the survey known as Piper, researchers David Lee from the University of Toronto, and the team you see right here, analyzed the observations by combining them with the observations from the Euclid Space Telescope and the Subaru Telescope. And while here they were not looking for faint starlight. Instead, they were using a sophisticated statistical technique referred to as Poisson cluster process. And it was actually meant to discover globular clusters. And in case you're not sure what this is, a globular cluster is a tight spherical grouping of ancient stars, very often stars that are billions of years old, that very often orbit much larger galaxies in a very specific orbit. And though we're not entirely certain how some of them were produced, many of them used to be cores of ancient galaxies that eventually became stripped over time. And while depending on how ancient the galaxy is, and depending on how massive the galaxy is, it might contain quite a few of these globular clusters in its orbit. For example, the Milky Way is known to contain at least 150. In contrast, our neighbor the Andromeda might contain at least 400. But because the stars here are so densely packed, and because there are so many of them, sometimes over 1 million, here this object is much harder to break and to pull apart, which basically makes these globular clusters extremely difficult to break over time, but also allows astronomers to use them for a lot of different measurements. And in this case, the team realized that if they actually found a tight group of these clusters in the middle of nowhere, they can only be explained as some kind of a massive amount of dark matter holding all of these clusters together, which would basically be a definition of a dark galaxy. In other words, by finding a bunch of these together, and especially the ones that are orbiting a central point, it would be very difficult to explain this if this was not a galaxy. And it just so happens that by June 2025, 3 separate observatories, Hubble, Euclid, and Subaru, seem to confirm the initial discovery. And so here they essentially detected extremely faint and extremely diffuse glow of stars surrounding a group of 4 individual globular clusters. The clusters you see identified in this image, with the additional observations basically confirming that there seems to be almost nothing here except for these 4 clusters. And this by itself is very significant because it essentially confirms that this seems to be a galaxy, but more importantly also makes this the first ever galaxy that was only discovered because of these globular clusters. But more importantly, this is not just some kind of a tiny dwarf galaxy, because this is pretty big. First of all, this is pretty far away, anywhere from 245 to 300 million light years away from us. But it's also pretty massive. Here, by observing how these particular clusters orbit around the center, researchers estimated the total mass of this object, and specifically the dark matter halo mass, at approximately 57 billion solar masses. Not as massive as our own galaxy, but much more massive than a typical dwarf galaxy. But surprisingly, its visible light, or its overall luminosity, was extremely low. It was equivalent to about maybe 1 to 6 million solar masses, which is thousands and thousands of times less than a typical galaxy like the Milky Way. And not surprisingly, most of this luminosity was actually inside these clusters. There was almost nothing else to produce light here. And well, based on these calculations and based on what we see here, this seems to contain anywhere from 99.94 to 99.98% of dark matter, essentially making this one of the darkest dark galaxies discovered so far. But obviously, as the name implies, because this is called CDG2, we also had the previous discovery, CDG1, and a few more discoveries we've discussed in some of the videos in the description. And so, for example, here's the image from CDG1 that was discovered back in 2022, and was also detected because of an overdensity of clusters without a clearly visible underlying galaxy. But even today, this is still a candidate, and it has not been confirmed yet. In contrast, CDG2 has now been officially confirmed, mostly because it was observed by several telescopes and they've all discovered the same. And by itself, this is actually pretty important because a lot of previous candidates or previous detections, such as for example this one referred to as Virgo HI21, were eventually revealed to be just intergalactic gas stripped during a galactic collision and not a true galaxy by itself. Similarly, another candidate referred to as HE0450 was later discovered to be just a normal galaxy that actually had a lot of its visible light hidden behind a cloud. But in contrast, we actually had two other discoveries from very close to the Milky Way that seem to make a lot more sense after this detection. And that's because at least one object, referred to as Cloud 9 that we've discussed not so long ago, seems to be also some kind of a relic representing mostly dark matter, but in this case, this one does not contain globular clusters. Nevertheless, this represents some kind of a failed galaxy, and is surprisingly close to the Milky Way. You can learn more about this Cloud 9 object in one of the previous videos in the description. And so CDG2 represents something that's a little bit more evolved. It seems to contain a small population of stars, and was also able to capture a few globular clusters. But I guess the question is, so why does it not contain stars? And how exactly did this form? Well, the current explanation is that this was very likely not actually empty before. Because it lives inside a very dense environment of the Perseus cluster, there's a very high chance that it actually had a lot of stars and a lot of hydrogen gas stripped away by gravitational interactions. Or basically, it might have been a regular galaxy before, but was eventually robbed of almost everything except for dark matter. And when the gas was stripped from it, it just could not form any new stars, and was only left with these cosmic breadcrumbs representing the 4 original globular clusters. And so in some sense, this is probably not a failed galaxy, and instead is a galaxy that was kind of stripped of everything. But for astrophysicists, this is also important because this is a major win for the Lambda CDM model, the standard model of cosmology. The model that suggests the existence of dark matter, with this particular galaxy basically confirming its existence. And so finding this object proves that dark matter can actually form structures resembling galaxies, which can then slowly accumulate more gas and eventually form galaxies as we know them. Or basically this represents a kind of a scaffold that very likely existed all over the place in the early universe. But at the same time, this will also allow astrophysicists to test various exotic propositions, because here we have a very unusual outlier, extremely different from everything we've seen before. And this also, of course, validates the search for additional similar objects, implying that we're probably going to discover CDG3 very soon as well. And so in short, this object proves that there is this invisible part of the universe, and it seems to be pretty complex, or at least more complex than we initially thought. And luckily for us, new missions like the Nancy Grace Roman telescope will eventually help us discover a lot more of these barely visible objects, because by design it's supposed to find these objects pretty quickly. But at least for now, that's all I wanted to mention. You can learn about some other similar objects in some of the previous videos in the description, but until we find something else, that's all I wanted to mention. Thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else. Support this channel on Petrov, where you can find additional videos without any ads, and can DM me directly, or by joining the channel membership that grants you early access. You can also support this channel by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.